What's up everyone, my name is Chris, and today we're going to be going over the Humble Choice bundle for April. For those of you out there who are unfamiliar with Humble Choice, which oh my god, what? I'm going to break it down for you. Each month you get 12 different games that are valued at over $320 for only $12 a month. That's literally $1 per game. Plus you get to keep the games forever, for the most part, not just the ones you sign up for. Basically, Humble Choice is a pretty sweet deal if you ask us. So without further ado, let's get into the games for the month of April.
This month's Humble Original is a sneak peek at Rogue Mansion, a roguelite take on old-school Resident Evil-style survival horror games. In this demo, you play as Valentina Diaz, who is totally not Jill Valentine with her pistol and lock-picking skill. I assume in the full game that there will be other characters to choose from. In each run, you'll play through a randomized mansion, with varying rooms, layouts, puzzles, and item distributions. You have health, measured by a heart, as well as a fear meter. More on that in a bit. You also have 8 inventory spaces, which is what will be used to hold weapons, healing items, crafting materials, ammo, and key items. If you haven't played an old-school survival game and that sounds like a tiny amount of space, it is. And that's by design, to stress you out about having to leave items behind or drop something you really want to hold on to because you need to pick up a puzzle item. Some enemies appear based on triggers, while others seem to appear at random, including in rooms that you've already visited, so you'll have to always be on your toes. Some enemies are total pushovers, but others will wreck your day. Combat is a bit more skill-based here, as you can dodge enemy attacks by pushing B right before they strike, as well as tackle them with the same button to delay their attack. You also, of course, have weapons, like your gun, which is very limited on ammo, your knife, which is weak but has infinite durability, and you'll also find weapons around the mansion, like a crowbar, which will eventually have to be repaired after a bit of use. Now, let's talk about the fear meter. Whenever a monster appears or you open cursed doors, your fear meter will go up. The higher your fear meter is, the harder things will get. When I let my fear get too high, monsters got tougher, the lights went out, and the walls started turning into flesh. To manage your fear, you can take soothing medicine, but that can be tough to find. A surefire way is to do well in combat by performing dodge streaks. Dodge an enemy 3 times, and you will earn a dodge streak, which can be activated once per room, lowering your fear a bit. Defeating enemies will also expose their hearts, which can be smashed for a short time to lower your fear. If you die, and let's face it, you're gonna die, you'll be graded on how far you made it through the mansion, and be given tokens, which you can spend to buy or upgrade perks for future playthroughs. I have to say, anytime I try Resident Evil 1, I always struggle because I feel like I have to hoard my items, or I'm gonna make the game unbeatable on that save file later on. But framed as a roguelite, where the time lost from a failed run is minutes instead of hours, I actually got excited to use my items and free up some inventory space. The randomized nature of the game will also be great for people who have played their favorite survival horror games to death, giving a fresh experience every time. In general, I don't love stuffing roguelite elements into genres I already enjoy, but I think this is a really great fit, both for people who love the genre and people who struggle with it like me.
Popup Dungeon is a roguelike RPG from developer Triple B Titles and released in August of last year. Popup Dungeon plays for the most part like a typical roguelike RPG, with players moving their party members around a grid in a turn-based combat system through somewhat randomized areas. Abilities are represented by cards, but thankfully this isn't another deck-building card game. While the classes and abilities seem to be mostly simple fantasy RPG archetypes when this game was first previewed last year, that seems to be one of the larger changes in terms of tone and gameplay from demo to full release. Alongside the stereotypical warrior, cleric, and wizard, we also have characters like a Star Trek redshirt ensign, a Blade ripoff, and an internet troll voiced by popular YouTuber and streamer Critical. These references and the humor each character brings to your team vary from worthy of a slight chuckle to fairly cringy. Most of the time I felt like I knew what they were going for, I just didn't find it funny. The main campaign presented to players also features the voice of John Delancey, aka Q from Star Trek The Next Generation, which was definitely a welcome surprise to hear. However, the campaign itself seems to be fairly straightforward fantasy fare. Fight your way through the perilous dungeons and defeat enemies before confronting the evil wizard in his evil tower. While the main campaign is serviceable enough, the one aspect of this game that intrigued me back when I first looked at it was the user-created content. Creating your own scenarios, gameplay mechanics, characters, and enemies uses a fairly simple drag and drop system in order to make everything work. This opens up a whole world of possibilities, as the user base for a game with these kind of tools can sometimes create some truly impressive games and showcases. However, that kind of user support never seemed to have come to Popup Dungeon, as there was only a handful of proof of concept or under construction levels available for download. Steam charts also shows an average of around 30 players over the last few months, so it unfortunately seems like Popup Dungeon never really took off. There's a lot to love about this game, from the Yoshi's Island-esque art style and charm, to the simple-to-use but powerful creation tools. Popup Dungeon just doesn't have enough depth to its mechanics, or enough developer-created content to showcase what the game is capable of, let alone attract much of an audience. While I had some fun during my time with the game, it's a hard one to recommend to anyone other than someone wanting to mess around with the creation tools, and unless Humble Choice revives the player base, I won't be putting more time in with this game.
Skully is a rolling platforming adventure game from the makers of Maze. You know, the game from the June 2017 bundle about sentient corn. Well, I loved that game, and I'm all about platformers with tight controls, so Skully should be right up my alley. Let's cover the good first. The visuals of the island look quite nice, and as I already noted, Skully, which is the name of the rolling skull you play as, controls quite nicely. Movement is satisfying and finely tuned. However, levels are broken up with annoying cutscenes and segments where you need to play as larger creatures to take out enemies or destroy obstacles, which are much less satisfying and enjoyable. There are flowers to collect, although the reward for doing so, other than the satisfaction of collecting the things, is concept art. It feels like small increases to health for Skully, or improving the speed or attack range of the larger monsters would be nice little rewards. Throughout the game, water is your enemy, and touching it will quickly sap the little bit of life that you have. And wouldn't you know it, there's water everywhere. I just don't have much else to say about the game. It's pretty simplistic. And I wish that the wonderful movement and controls were put to use on a more focused game with better level design built around the main mechanic of rolling around. It's a fine game, but it's not great, and I don't see myself coming back to it again.
Colt Canyon is a 2D roguelike action shooting game from developer Retrific and released in June of last year. Players are tasked with going after their partner, who has been kidnapped, and to get revenge along the way. At first you'll only have a generic cowboy to play as, but you'll soon start unlocking 9 other characters, each with their own unique weapon layout, strengths, and weaknesses. Gameplay feels like what you'd expect from a 2D roguelike. The recent hit game Hades, as well as Lovecraft's Untold Stories from the Choice Bundle this past February, both felt pretty similar in terms of movement and shooting mechanics. Movement is controlled with the left stick or the keyboard, while aiming and shooting is done with the right stick or mouse. Controls are very tight and responsive, perfect for this kind of Twitch-based gameplay design. You can swap out weapons with different ones you find along the way, pick up things like dynamite, or even stealth kill enemies if they haven't spotted you yet. When you're not killing everything in sight, you'll be exploring somewhat small-scale and seemingly randomly generated level layouts. Some areas will be hiding valuable bullets and health kits, while other areas might have a hostage you can rescue for a power-up, such as faster reload times. It helps make exploring feel rewarding, while keeping it somewhat streamlined thanks to the relatively small map size for each stage. After some stages, you might face an ambush of enemies that you'll have to defeat in order to continue, and I died quite a few times during my short time with the game. However, thanks to the incredibly well-crafted arcade nature of the gameplay, death never felt like too much of a punishment. Since this isn't a roguelike where you can grind for permanent stats, equipment, or upgrades, every run feels balanced and like it could be the run that you see through to the end, if you're good enough and careful enough. Colt Canyon is simple, but it's a lot of fun. The Wild West aesthetic does a lot to draw me in personally, but anyone who's a fan of arcade action or the roguelike genre definitely needs to give this game a shot.
Simulacra is a horror narrative adventure game in which you find the phone of a girl named Anna. Anna has gone missing, and based on what you find on her phone, it seems like she may be in trouble. You'll have to look through the details of her life, speak with her contacts, and decide how you want to present yourself, as well as who you think you can trust to help you find her. The whole game is played through an interface with her cell phone, and you'll be opening up different apps to talk to different people, as well as searching for clues on how to access information that's locked away from you by passwords. It's a simple but interesting concept, and it's not too scary. It just has a general sense of dread, as well as some creepy audio and visual effects. Unfortunately, it's tough to stay in the creepy vibe with the weird writing and over-the-top acting. There are a lot of what I think are supposed to be jokes, but most of the characters end up being pretty annoying, and after playing it for a couple of hours some time ago, I decided not to finish it out. Simulacra II is a similar concept. You're digging through someone's phone to try and find out more about them. However, this time the owner of the phone is dead, and at the start of the game you get to decide if you want to be a detective trying to solve what you believe to be a murder, or a tabloid writer digging for your next article. I went with the detective option, and immediately it became apparent that the level of polish on this sequel had been stepped up over the first game. You actually get some story moments that take place outside of the phone, portrayed through FMVs. The writing and acting has improved, and the jokes actually land this time. Going the route of the detective, your boss knows something was very wrong with the death of Maya, the owner of the phone. However, he has no idea how to use technology, and has no budget to run his side department, leading to some great moments of comedic relief to break up the gruesome and depressing revelations that you find out about Maya. Instead of having to explain to every new person who the heck you are and why you have this person's phone in a dramatic conversation like in the first game, you get to just say, "Yo, I'm a cop," and everyone gets it. While I decided not to finish the original, I do plan to spend some more time with Simulacra 2. Aven Colony is a colony building simulation game where you find yourself trying to support human life on an alien planet. If you know anything about me, you will know that games like this usually aren't up my alley. My time with them usually goes something like this. Austin is introduced to new necessary buildings. Austin builds them. Austin finds out moments later that he's created the worst layout possible. Austin is a dumbass. I was really not looking forward to covering Aven Colony, but I was very pleasantly surprised. There's a short optional tutorial to teach you controls and the game's basics, and once you're in the proper game, you can do whatever you'd like, but you'll get a steady flow of missions that direct you towards building things that you'll need and providing rewards to keep things moving. These missions also help you with the interface. Like, for example, if the mission is to build a habitat, it'll make the icon for housing buildings lightly bounce up and down so you don't get lost in the menus. If a building needs to go on a specific spot, like a mine needs to go onto an ore deposit, there will be a button on the mission that says "Show me," and it will move the camera to focus on where you need to place the building. Mechanics and problems to deal with are introduced slowly over time, instead of overwhelming you all at once, and each new mechanic seems to come at a time when you feel like you're in control of everything you're currently dealing with. Speaking of which, let's discuss some of what you'll be handling. You'll need to provide food and water for your residents, and power for your buildings. Power and food can come from a number of different sources, but one of the most efficient sources of power early on is solar panels and farms for food. However, as the seasons change, farms can't produce food in the winter, and solar panels run at half their efficiency, so you'll have to have other forms of energy and food production, or have enough stored to make it through the winter. Thankfully, the interface is pretty good at showing you if upcoming winters will be a problem, showing you how your food supply per person is, as well as what your current power capacity is versus what it will be in the winter. As your population grows and you start to support a bigger base with geothermal energy, you'll have to start dealing with pollution and other factors keeping your citizens happy. Initially, unhappy citizens will simply immigrate away from your colony, leaving you with less workers. But once you grow big enough, there will be referendums, and you'll have to keep people generally happy to stay in command. If you're a big doofus like me when it comes to planning and city building, I'll encourage you to try this game out because it goes out of its way to help you understand everything that's going on, and so far as I've played, never tries to screw you over with something unexpected. If you're more experienced with this genre, you can probably move a lot faster, and there are some interesting options to play with on different buildings to really optimize what you're doing, as well as to handle situations you might encounter without creating a new building to deal with it. That said, looking at reviews, experienced players may find themselves bored after a bit. Personally, I had a surprising amount of fun. In Other Waters is a game about guiding an ocean diver/xenobiologist through alien waters. You play as an AI, and while neither you nor Ellery, the diver, know how you came to be in control, here you are. You'll spend most of your time looking at a top-down view of the ocean map, centered on Ellery. You can scan the surrounding area for wildlife, as well as points of interest where you can direct Ellery to walk. Some of these spots will allow you to take a sample, and the samples you take can be used in all sorts of ways, like restoring power to Ellery's suit, or clearing a path when no other exists. The interface is just intuitive enough for you to easily figure out where you generally need to be looking, and just obtuse enough to feel a bit foreign and like you need to interact with it in a bit of an unnatural way, leading to a relaxing but mildly engaging experience moment to moment as you scan, move, and take samples. Ellery is looking for her partner Minai, who has disappeared but not before sending out one last message. Your goal is to help Ellery find her partner, but along the way you'll both be learning about the planet and the life inhabiting it. As you explore and scan new life and areas, Ellery will talk to you, allowing you to answer questions with yes or no responses. This is a very slow-paced game, and it will require you to enjoy a more relaxed experience, or at least a lot of exploration. That said, I'm into it. The interface is pleasant to look at alongside that calming soundscape, and I'm legitimately interested to find out what secrets are waiting to be discovered. This is one I plan to keep going with. Remothered Broken Porcelain is a survival horror game, and a sequel to Remothered Tormented Fathers. I did not play the first game in the series, but thankfully there's an optional recap of the events of the first game when you start Broken Porcelain. However, when the actual story of this game starts up, either the series is already being crushed to death by its own lore, or the story of this new entry is just terribly written and hard to follow. I won't get into it in case you don't want the events of the first game spoiled. That said, the graphical presentation is very nice, as long as you don't look at faces and animations while characters are talking outside of cutscenes. Seriously though, the lighting and texture work look great. This is about where my enjoyment of the game ends. The gameplay centers around stealth, sneaking around enemies, and running and hiding when you've been seen. There are items that you can use as distractions, and hiding places here and there. However, running uses stamina, and you don't have a whole lot to work with. I often found myself running to dead ends with locked doors, or ending up in places I really didn't want to be. Even worse, when I made it into a hiding place in time, without warning, I was given a super fast minigame to keep myself from being detected, and of course failed before I knew what was going on. Stealth horror may be one of the most stressful genres I can think of, and between that and the rough story, I did not have a good time here. However, if you don't care much about the story and enjoy games where you have to play hide and sneak, and especially if you liked the gameplay of Tortured Fathers, this is a game for you to check out. Otherwise, you should probably steer clear.
Rock of Ages 3 Make and Break is a competitive tower defense game from developer Ace Team and Giant Monkey Robot, and released in July of last year. Much like the previous two games in the series, Rock of Ages 3 has you competing against cartoon representations of different fictional and real historical figures in a tower defense game. You'll start by choosing what boulder you want to use, each with unique stats and uses, as well as which tower defense obstacles you want to use. You'll then get ready to place these obstacles all over your opponent's course while they do the same to yours. Once your ball is ready, you'll roll it through the stage, almost like a Katamari game. You'll need to either smash through or avoid obstacles placed by your opponents, in the hopes you can get your boulder to the end in one piece and damage the enemy's big door. Destroy the door and you beat your opponent. Rock of Ages 3 also adds a lot of side games with entirely different goals and gameplay styles, such as Skee Ball, that helps to add some variety to the levels. Whenever you encounter your next historical figure, you'll get one of the series' patented Python-esque cutscenes that the series has become so well known for. While the animation still looks great, the humor seems to be somewhat lacking this time around. The introduction to each character is a lot shorter and simpler than they were in previous games, and it makes each stage and opponent feel so much more lifeless and lacking in unique charm. It's incredibly disappointing to see, as these cutscenes were always one of the strongest and most consistent elements of these games. Rock of Ages 3 does feature a lot of new creation tools for hardcore fans. You can create your own levels with what appears to be a surprising amount of control over the design and overall layout. You can even share and download these levels online through the game, so if you're really craving that tower defense gameplay, there should be plenty of content here for you. Overall, however, Rock of Ages 3 seems to fall flat when it comes to everything I've loved about this series so far. The humor is lacking, the gameplay just feels stale, the character and charm is all lost, and it feels like they're trying to make up for these missing pieces by throwing a bunch of different side games to keep us distracted. While the core gameplay is still solid, and the user-created levels could add a lot of life for hardcore fans, Rock of Ages 3 feels dated and unnecessary when compared to the two vastly superior games that came before it, and I don't think I'll be coming back to playing more anytime soon. Main Assembly is a simulation game from developer Bad Yoke Games and released in March of last year. Main Assembly has you building whatever vehicle you can come up with to complete a series of levels, or just to mess around with in sandbox mode. In the main game, you'll progress through a series of relatively small levels, each designed with a few different approaches to getting around. Your main goal will be to make it to the end of the level, but each stage comes with a series of side objectives as well, such as toppling over every crash test dummy hidden throughout the level, or getting through the stage with a very heavy vehicle. These levels serve as a nice introduction to building vehicles, as they slowly push you to expand your boundaries and start thinking outside of the box in order to properly approach each stage and set of objectives. There's also a variety of other modes, mostly focused on multiplayer, such as a BattleBot-style arena, a sandbox mode, and various other online lobbies. While main assembly ticks a lot of the boxes you might expect from one of these kind of simulation games, the entire experience was just kind of drab for me. Anytime a game tries to sell you on things like, your imagination is the only limit, or if you can dream it, you can build it, I know it's not going to be the kind of game I'm going to enjoy. Games like this, or last year's Choice Bundle game Trailmakers, live and die based on your willingness to learn the ropes, and find the enjoyment in the game's creation tools and engine. If you can find yourself spending hours messing around with different motors, body shapes, and slight programming, I'm sure you'll have a blast playing around with your creations in main assembly. For what it's worth, I did have fun with the handful of levels I played through, as it is a well-made game with a variety of complex yet approachable set of tools at your disposal, but there's nothing here to bring me back for more. I just tend to not enjoy these kind of games, so there wasn't a whole lot main assembly was going to do to win me over.
Shenmue III is a narrative-driven action-adventure game and the third title in the Shenmue franchise. Shenmue III puts players in the role of Ryo Hazuki, a Japanese martial artist hell-bent on getting revenge on his father's killer. Gameplay largely revolves around the different story beats that are given to Ryo. When he gets a new objective, you'll spend time gathering info from residents, searching through different buildings, and other tasks to gather clues as well as get some new leads. If you're lucky, you'll find some time to play some of the many minigames as well as get dirty with some of the combat and kung fu training. The minigames this time around are probably the most polished in the series yet. The games range from straight up throwing money away when gambling, all the way down to chopping wood to earn some, well, modest money. Combat, on the other hand, takes a lot of getting used to and even then isn't extremely satisfying once you master it. When you start combat, you can press the face buttons to perform different moves as well as block and evade. This may sound pretty standard, but as you input your commands, there is a moment's lag before the actual move comes out. This would be fine if the game was more like rock paper scissors in terms of fighting, however while you're trying to play chess, your opponents will be playing Tekken. I think that's enough explanation, so let's get this out of the way. The reason I was picked to review Shenmue 3 is that I am a die-hard Shenmue fan. I love Shenmue and ended up spending $100 on the Kickstarter. I was really dang excited to play it but couldn't even make it past the first 10 hours out of boredom. Needless to say, I was very disappointed. Now I could cut into each and every aspect as to why this game is inferior to its prequels. For the sake of time, I'll focus on what I consider the most egregious issue I can see. Shenmue 3 has a problem with consistency. There's nothing more immersion-breaking than a game that decides to completely change how it presents information or its characters between two different conversations. The game itself is a treat to look at and elevates the realism meets anime style of its predecessors. Some cutscenes even had me feeling that old Shenmue magic, and then within the next breath.
Hi there.
Aha! Come to apprentice under me, have you?
Nothing.
Another consistency issue that glares its ugly head are these odd cutscenes when you're walking with Shenhua or other people. You'll walk for a while, then it dips to black for the transition. When it returns, it's the same conversation, but they've stopped walking, and then it dips to black again. These scenes in particular have some of the oddest writing I've seen in a game. It's almost like they made the scene, realized they had more money, made some new visuals, and instead of completely revamping the scene, just added it in between there. It all comes off unfortunately as a poorly crafted visual. Finally, and my biggest problem in terms of consistency, is with Ryo himself. Ryo has been through a lot by this point in the story. Over the previous two games, he's worked a lot of different jobs, trained with a lot of different martial arts masters, fought against both the Yakuza and the Triad, and a whole bunch more. Even if you didn't follow the story of Shenmue, you would expect by this point in his life, he would know how to piece simple thoughts together. In Shenmue 3, Ryo is presented as a competent detective at times and is able to piece together clues without any additional input. At other times though, it's like he's some alien from outer space gathering information for his home planet about the most mundane of things. There's a period of the game early on where Shenhua accompanies you to speak with villagers, and as Ryo opens up, the villagers kind of eye him like he's got brain damage before Shenhua speaks up and they all sigh out of relief that his caretaker is there with them. Ryo is a special boy, after all. When I reviewed Shenmue 1 and 2 a while back, I called them a character study of Ryo Hazuki rather than an action-filled romp. Unfortunately, Shenmue 3 breaks that line of thought as at least the early hours show Ryo has learned nothing since he began his journey and has actually reverted to the dullard he was at the beginning. Shenmue 3 is not a masterpiece and definitely not worth $100. However, it is worth a bit more than 12 USD in my opinion, but not by much. If you really love Shenmue 1 and 2, give this a shot. I personally was hating the idea of getting back into it, but found myself enjoying the combat and some other things, so I'll try to trudge through it as well. If you're not a fan though, and what you've seen today doesn't entice you at all, I wouldn't waste my time. Yakuza is the spiritual successor of Shenmue and has received a lot more polish over the years. Frankly, it's the better series.
F1 2020 is a Formula 1 racing sim game by developer Codemasters. Codemasters' racing sims seem to be something of a regular occurrence here in the Humble Choice bundles, so most of you should know what to expect by now. Players will race around real-world tracks using real Formula 1 cars in a very difficulty racing simulation game. F1 2020 features a variety of difficulty sliders, allowing players to adjust each of the game's systems to their desired level of difficulty. These difficulty options are still what makes the Codemasters series some of the most approachable racing sims available, and it's great to see them on display in F1 as well. These difficulty options continue to be what makes the Codemasters series some of the most approachable racing sims available, and it's great to see them on display in F1 2020 as well. F1 2020 features the standard modes you'd expect, such as career, time trial races, and some online play as well. New to the series this year is the ability to create your own F1 team. As the head of the team, as well as their main driver, you'll be able to customize your team's color scheme, what drivers you hire, what sponsors you take on, the livery of your car, and of course control every aspect of the actual mechanics of the car you're racing with. If you don't want to get into the nitty-gritty details of engine upgrades and purchasing parts, the game does a fairly good job of suggesting what you should focus on next. There's also been plenty of behind-the-scene changes and balances that have been made since last year's entry, including some based on actual Formula 1 driver feedback on the game. Overall, F1 2020 continues the trend of solid but not mind-blowing Formula 1 racing games coming from Codemasters. The game looks amazing as it always does, and the little additions and changes help to justify its existence as a yearly franchise. The ability to create a new racing team does a lot to make this game stand out among the rest, but at the end of the day, it's still the same core simulation racing experience. If previous Humble entries like F1 2019 or Dirt didn't change your mind about simulation racing games, I don't think F1 2020 is going to do so either. However, if you're already a fan like myself, this is an easy pick to recommend this month, and I'll be spending a lot more time with this game over the next year. Sniper: Ghost Warrior Contracts is a first-person shooter stealth game from developer CI Games and released in November of 2019. Players take control of a lone sniper, taking down targets in the newly liberated nation of Siberia in a near-future, alternate history timeline. The story is a super serious military war mumbo-jumbo that sounds like it was ripped straight from the pages of a Tom Clancy novel, and it almost bored me to tears before I could actually get the game started. However, once the game actually gets going, I was surprised at how much fun I was having. Gameplay has a heavy focus on stealth, as well as the obvious sniping. Maps are fairly large, and contain a multitude of objectives and targets that you can approach from multiple directions with different tactics. It reminds me a lot of planning a stealth takedown of an enemy camp in Metal Gear Solid 5, which was my favorite aspect of that game as well. These semi-open levels can sometimes be a bit too much, however, and the lackluster minimap doesn't do much to help guide your way, even when using custom waypoints. The sniping mechanics are fairly simple once you get the grasp on all the information that's available to you. Before too long, I ended up calculating for distance and wind fairly quickly, and was able to pull off some pretty impressive feeling shots. Things didn't always go as planned, with the AI on the normal difficulty feeling fairly realistic in terms of their ability to spot you. However, even when a plan starts to fall apart, pulling off the perfect sniper shot and seeing that bullet cam kick in is oh so satisfying. Sure, the bullet cam isn't anything revolutionary, and isn't even a particularly amazing bullet cam, but it's still fun to see. Overall, I was very surprised by Sniper Ghost Warrior Contracts. I wasn't familiar with this series at all, but from an outsider's perspective, this seems like the perfect place for newcomers like me to jump on. The story takes itself way too seriously, but the gameplay is really solid, and feels like a great mix of Sniper Elite and Metal Gear Solid 5. Fans of these games will have a lot of fun with Sniper Ghost Warrior Contracts, and while I'm not sure that it's a deep enough experience for me to see through to the very end, I can't wait to spend at least a little more time with it.
Overall, this month was a pretty mixed bag for me. A handful of these games took me by surprise, and Rogue Mansion looks really cool. However, it's just a sneak peek and not the full game, and as far as full games we got, a lot of these really did not scratch an itch for me. It's a bit weird that Humble didn't reveal the games a week ahead of time like they did for last month's bundle. Also of note, 3 of the games came from publisher Modus Games, and 2 of them came from Team 17. I wouldn't be surprised if the lineup for this month wasn't locked in a week before the bundle launched this time around, as some of what's in here does seem scraped together.
I found myself overall very surprised by this month's bundle. There was a couple of games I already owned, but at least in the case of F1 2020, it was still a solid game that I would have been pleased to see either way. Main Assembly was the only major low point for me, and even then that's more of a difference in personal preference than anything else. So while the highs of this month weren't as high as they usually are, the lows weren't very low, and that makes for a pleasant, mellow kind of bundle this month, something I can definitely vibe with.
If you're interested, here's a cost breakdown of each of the games. A huge thank you to Michael Slater, Blake Harms, and all of our patrons over on Patreon. Your support means the world to us. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.